Great. Um, so my name is Keith Menhinick. I'm mostly going to be moderating, but I'm involved with both Lost and Found Youth and Park Avenue Baptist Church as a volunteer. So I'll be asking lots of questions and giving Nasheedah and Darci chances to share their wisdom. But also want this to be conversational. So we do encourage people to like throw questions in the chat or state them out loud. I'm okay if you turn off the microphone and be like, "Oh, a quick question or interjection," especially if it relates specifically to your own community as we think about opportunities for collaboration between nonprofit and church. So as a quick introduction, I'm Keith Menhinick. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently a student at Emory working on my dissertation. I spent several years in trauma chaplaincy, both in a hospital and in several different children's homes. And that's what led me to Lost and Found Youth, as well as to Park Avenue. So in my dissertation work, I'm actually interviewing people from both Park Ave and Lost and Found around experiences of race, queerness, homelessness, and spirituality, and trauma, but focusing on the resources and the resilience and the spirituality of queer folk. So that's a little bit about me. Darci or Nasheedah, would one of you like to share some about y'all before we begin?
Do you want me to go, Nasheedah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So my name is Darci Jaret. I am really blessed to be able to be one of the pastors at Park Avenue Baptist Church. And I say one of the pastors, so we have no lead pastor. We have a circle leadership model. And so I get to journey with this creative group of people. And so I'm so excited to be here to collaborate even further with Lost and Found. And also to talk about caregiving and the ways that church and theology has done harm in so many ways. And how do we, if we really are going to have this conversation about the shifting paradigms, the shifting ethics, this new normal that I think is evolving and happening right now in this time of unveiling, this time of grief, in this time of pandemic and the world just changing, then we really need to look at partnerships that are working, what's making them work, what the hard parts are of those partnerships. And Park Avenue, we're just so blessed to be a place where it's just like a soft place to land, right? I came in as an intern and wanted to paint in worship, and they were like, yes. And then I painted something terrible, and they were like, it's beautiful. And so, and we build some things and some ways of being that don't work. And so I think this idea of trying and trying again is so critical in community, and everyone having a place to begin. We love to read this amazing invitation written by Mickey Scott Bay Jones, which is called an invitation to brave space. And the part that really strikes me every time is just this idea that everyone has to start somewhere. And if we build it together, we know that it's imperfect, but it will be ours together. So I'm happy to be here. I do hold a MDiv from Candler as well, and I have in the past I've worked in nonprofits. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, I'm Nasheedah. I am the director over here at Lost and Found Youth, and very delighted to be here. Don't have a lot to say. I guess I have been involved working with youth and in the LGBT community since about 1996, which is a very long time for someone who's 29 years old. And started with an organization called Youth Pride many, many, many years ago. And ended up back here in Atlanta after a tour in California, working with Lost and Found. And I'm very pleased to be back and I'm very pleased to be working with Park Avenue and Darci and Keith, and really excited about what's going to come out of this session today. And welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up with us.
Great. So to get us started, I'm really interested in how the missions and values of Lost and Found Youth and Park Avenue align, because I do think a lot of opportunities for partnership happen when there's an alignment in vision. And Nasheedah, you just said like you've been committed to LGBTQ youth for a long time. Like this
Yeah.
has been a passionate commitment for you. So,
Mm-hmm.
so why a nonprofit on homelessness then? Like, what is the connection between a commitment to LGBTQ youth and ending homelessness? Might you speak to some of those needs for a minute?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I have encountered throughout my years in this working with LGBT youth and also working with HIV positive youth, has been a need for culturally competent homeless services. Going, you know, there have always been at every point in my career, I encountered LGBT youth who were without a place to stay. And some of those encounters, I ended up making referrals to organizations that, you know, kind of report having LGBT friendly policies, but have not really been able to create, they have been either unable or unwilling to create safe spaces for LGBT youth. So it's a need that I've recognized my entire life. And when I moved back to Atlanta, and a friend of mine who was a volunteer here told me about Lost and Found, I was like, oh, I'm going to work with them. That's perfect. We've needed this in Atlanta for decades. And it just kind of ties naturally. Anybody who has ever worked with LGBT youth, particularly trans folks, knows that there is a desperate need for more. Lost and Found, we can't do it all. There's a desperate need for more services for folks who are experiencing homelessness from our communities.
Yeah, so I hear you really saying there's that need for more services. And I wonder, Darci, if that might be an entry point for you to speak about how does the mission and commitment at Park Ave, how has that led you to this partnership with Lost and Found?
Yeah, I love the way you said that, Nasheedah, the culturally competent LGBTQ services. And I think so many churches are not culturally competent when it comes to LGBTQIA theology as well. And so one of the ways that that we at Park Avenue sort of frame it is this idea that what if we in our theological practice really sought to exclude no one, and that cuts across so many boundaries and boxes that we might put God in. But what if our message did, to our best extent, did no harm, right? And so being that we are seeking to not other, we are a congregation that is a lot of queer folks, a lot of young folks. We hold a Black liberation theology and a queer liberation theology together, saying, you know, that these two movements need to be one if they're not, and that all of our liberation is tied up in mutuality. And so when we heard that Lost and Found Youth needed a space, or was in a space that that was costing too much and was too sort of heavy on the resources side, we knew that we had something we could offer, and that has been a vision of ours for a very long time. And I'm preparing right now for us to start this sermon series about decolonizing church, and one of the ways that Mark Charles is very clear that decolonization means giving back to Native folks, right? And so I want to hold that intention and say, for places and spaces like ours, our using spaces and offering spaces, we hope becomes that type of reconnection, right? Connection to communities that were harmed much as a result of Christian theology that othered so badly, and that we recognize that it is often trans women of color who are most impacted by homelessness. And yeah, and that there's a lot of Christian cultural pressure that is involved in that, whether that family system, whatever happens in that family system. So that's, yeah, it's a part of our mission for sure.
Great, thank you for sharing that. I want to kind of connect to, I don't know if y'all's screens are set up like mine, but Nasheedah and Darci, I'm in between them. So when I'm pointing this way, I'm like, I don't know if that's y'all's visual too, but I want to connect something that both of you said. Nasheedah, you mentioned how some places have LGBTQ affirming policies, but they're unwilling or unable to really create spaces that are culturally competent and able to, I guess, put in practice what they say they believe or affirm. And Darci, you were talking about how as a church, Park Ave is committed to Black and Indigenous and queer theologies, to really highlighting and putting those theologies central. And I hear you making that connection that when we do prioritize Black, Indigenous, queer theologies, that requires decolonizing our space, the physical, actual building of Park Avenue. So as you both think about what it has looked like to, on the Park Ave side, to give up space. Well, both organizations have given up space and have now created this new space together that is a shared space. Darci, you mentioned that as a decolonial practice. I wonder if you might comment some more on that, kind of theologically, on what it means for churches to share their resources. And one way to do that is giving up space. And then maybe just talk about some of the challenges and gifts that you both have experienced and are maybe currently working through. Like, what are the challenges and gifts of sharing space?
Absolutely. So I think there's so much in that question. So as a decolonial practice, we say not one person has, let's say, the corner market on God, right? And so that's just theologically, right? I am not some conduit that is unique in my journey with God. And so in that, we have to recognize the work of orgs, particularly of Lost and Found, that do this work that is so close and so needed in this world, right? And so when it came to thinking about giving up space, we really, it was sort of this organic process, right? How it was connected was through two roommates, one who is a deacon at Park Ave and one who worked as the former volunteer coordinator at Park Ave. So it's like our circles were connected already. So the conversation started among friends who care deeply about the missions of both of these organizations. And the deacon just happened to be also the coordinator of an immersion program that uses the space that's right next to the Lost and Found shelter upstairs in the church. And so they literally had like their own missions of their orgs and the space that they knew so well. So I think that is a larger message about what decolonization is about. It's about being intimately connected with each other. It's about recognizing that I am co-creating with you who is co-creating as well. So that when it comes to thinking about your problems, I'm thinking about mine as well, or looking for solutions, let's say. I'm looking for solutions for all of us. So I love that that's the story of how this partnership began, because I just think it's so important. And so, yeah, and I want Nasheedah to talk about it because it's really something that Nasheedah said that it really inspired me, excuse me, in one of our meetings, where she said, no, I want us to share space. And I'll let, if that's where you're going with your answer, please talk about that. But I do think in order to be decolonial, we have to recognize each other, each other's mission, life, thriving as equal and as important as our own. So why would we save these spaces in the church to sit empty 6 days a week?
Yeah, thank you. Nasheedah, would you like to comment on some of the, how have you experienced the sharing of space? What are some of the gifts and challenges of that?
I think it's been amazing. I think it's been an amazing experience for our youth. I hear them. I'm in a meeting though. Someone's knocking on my door.
I might have someone, a little boy running through my door too, so no worries.
So it's just been amazing. I think it's been an amazing experience for many of our youth who have come from backgrounds where they were very damaged by their interactions with faith organizations and faith communities. And so when we took the idea, you know, when Leslie and Ashley got together and then brought it to me and to Darci and the other leaders over at Park Avenue, and I took it to my board and said, "Oh, we're gonna move into a church,
A Baptist church."
A Baptist church." There were some pretty strong reactions and raised eyebrows, and that's what you get when you hear Baptist church, particularly when you're in queer spaces. But that's also what so many of our young people have come from, backgrounds, the kinds of backgrounds that have engendered those responses in LGBT people. But to be in a space that is loving and welcoming and affirming, you know, that is also a church and a Baptist church has been really powerful for the healing process for many of them. And that was something that I kind of hoped for when we were crafting this partnership in the beginning, that we're in the South, we're in the deep South, and AKA the Bible Belt. And so it's not something that you can just ignore, that many of the folks that we're serving are coming from, you know, very deeply Christian backgrounds. And unfortunately, the idea of Christian has been kind of co-opted. And I think that some of them have begun going to services at Park Avenue and you know, talking to Henra, talking to Darci, hanging out with the deacons that are there on a regular basis, and just getting to know, you know, in a very organic way, this faith community that represents something completely different than what they are used to. And that's been one of the joys of sharing the space. I don't think that we've lost anything. You know, first of all, there's plenty of space. It's a huge space. But I don't think we've lost anything from being in a building all by ourselves with in a office park with neighbors who were tolerant to hostile of our presence, you know, and then moving into this community and the reception that we got, not just at the church, but when we went to the Grant Park community meetings and introduced ourselves to the community. It's just been such a welcoming experience for me, for the organization, for our youth. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to just name some things. Like what I hear in both of y'all's description is that the partnership between Park Ave and Lost and Found was not decided like from on high and then imposed on groups that were separate. Like you were already committed to this work in different ways, and people were already in intimate relationship and community. So I'm just like, for those of us interested in how we might implement this in our own faith communities or our own nonprofits, what I hear from this story is that the partnership was never forced, but Darci, you said it happened organically through an intentional relationship and community. So I think that's really important to elevate from what y'all are talking about. And Nasheedah, I'm really drawn to what you're saying about how it's been, I don't know if you use the word healing, but how it's been, or maybe powerful for youth that have had such harmful experiences with religion to have a counter experience in the church that does affirm them. And you spoke to Baptist a minute in there, how that just, I grew up Southern Baptist. I have a lot of, church trauma, hurt, rejection to still working through. And I think Baptist conjures that up for a lot of us. So Darci, my question to you is, why does Park Ave stay Baptist? What is important about Baptist in that, and how is that influencing y'all's theology, your mission, and this partnership model? Why Baptist?
Thank you.
Why not
Wow.
drop a traumatic term for some people?
Yes. Well, and I think yes. And I've asked myself that same question. I know that my predecessors asked themselves that question as well, especially when we are an affirming, radical, decolonial place. And so the idea of being Baptist, well, I guess maybe I'll just talk about me. I wasn't raised Baptist. Excuse me. I was raised Catholic. And so there's some serious hierarchy in the Catholic Church. And my beginning of my, I left the church very young, got confirmed, and I was like, I don't have to do this anymore. And then I was really informed in my own spiritual journey through 12-step recovery. And 12-step recovery is a very inverted triangle model, let's say, where those in charge is everyone, and they offer their trust to those who represent at higher levels, right? And so that is almost exactly the same way that Baptists, the structure of a Baptist church works, right? And so the fact that my Baptist church would call a trans non-binary pastor speaks to who they want to have in leadership, right? My co-pastor is a cis-het Black man. And so these, not just who we are, because we are more than those things, but I think that representation is important, right? And so when we say that Black liberation theology and queer theology are the groundings, that the places where we stand, we really do stand there. And so we are Baptist, and so many roots of the Baptist theology are grounded in liberties, in these freedoms to interpret the biblical text, particularly in the ways that we see them. So when we talk about the importance of representation and leadership, we also talk about the importance of who, and the multiplicity of voices of who is theologically interpreting for our community, but also we say that everybody does that. So in the Baptist faith, anyone can give the ordinances, anyone can participate in those ordinances, or some other faiths call them now I'm forgetting the name, we only have ordinances, but like communion, baptism, and those are the main ordinances that we recognize. So the reason we stay Baptist, at least in my mind, and I say that it really is in my mind, because again, everybody is allowed to have their own opinions about this. It gives us the freedom to say, this is my interpretation, what is yours? And to further deconstruct and let's say have an ethic that opposes white supremacist culture, where I can say, this is my interpretation, and you are free to critique that interpretation as a member, respecting and loving this space. So
Mhm.
I think, maybe I'm being long-winded, but I think that's mainly the things I think about when I think about us being Baptist.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that. As a Baptist ordained minister, I return to that question of why Baptists a lot.
Hmm.
I always go back to the freedom of conscience. That's really big for me.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, we talked a lot about sharing space and some of like the benefits and the theology behind that. I wonder if there's anything else that you've learned as you all have gotten more into partnership. Like maybe how has this clarified your mission or your values, or maybe inspired new focuses, new projects, or maybe you've just learned some things about communication channels. I'm just curious, what have you learned as you've gotten more into this partnership?
Well, we're in a global pandemic. And so what we learned, at least in that moment, it made, the decision to prioritize our, I say our, the decision to prioritize communities that live in the church was a very straightforward decision. Or it was, we don't have a church hierarchy that's saying you got to do this or you got to do this. It's people in conversation with each other, right? So knowing that youth were in the space, living there, along with our at the time our church sexton, and knowing that, it made it really clear where our priority was, in terms of, so not just representing and allowing those most at risk to be safe, but those living at the church who are at risk in maybe different ways. I mean, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nasheedah, is there anything you feel like you or Lost and Found as an organization has learned or gained clarity about as y'all have leaned into this partnership model?
Um, I think I've been reminded that partnerships take the partnerships that are worth it take work, and we've worked really hard to to understand each other's culture, and as we kind of blend those cultures together, uh, and to make sharing this space as rewarding as possible. I think if I had it to do over again, we probably would have spent some more time on planning, on specifically like scenarios-based planning. There have been things that have come up where we had to come back to the table to talk about it, because we hadn't really thought about it in the beginning. And I think some kind of intensive brainstorming of scenarios um, would have really been helpful towards the beginning of the partnership. But we've been at this for just about a year now, and I think we're old hats at this point.
I still have to introduce myself to everyone when I come in. We're not there all like,
Me too.
pastors. We talked a lot, even in the planning for this workshop, um, about intentionality, but being forthright about our own, the things we're getting out of this, right? Whereas a lot of churches, particularly churches that don't have affirming theologies, um, a lot of our folks that are coming from those situations, that's very triggering to sort of have vagueness about where people stand.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I don't know how many conversations that I have initially with the youth where, it's their first time meeting and I am like, hey, this is where I stand. This is who I am. And I think that's, that's something that happens, like I said, multiple times. And, sometimes multiple times in a day. But I think that's the way that, and one of the reasons why I feel called to be a pastor is to say there is a different way to be I think it's, I think it's similar to being really outwardly anti-racist, and how I need to make that clear. If I'm not saying that, then I am actually not living into it. And so where the action and where the words happen to make that clear are those small moments of healing, I hope.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak from my own experience as a gay person. I know my belonging is never assumed when I walk in a church. In fact, I tend to assume the opposite, that I'm not, unless my belonging is clearly stated, I'm not always sure that I belong. And so I hear you saying that that's important to name, not just about gender and sexuality, but also our commitments to racial justice, Darci. And that connects with what Nasheedah was talking about, the need for more culturally competent care, specifically with the homeless or with any population, really. Um,
Well, and that's your area, Keith. I don't know if you made this clear in your bio. Keith's area of study involves LGBTQIA care, and he's well practiced in that. So, things that
I'll mention a little bit of that because I think it can connect. If you do like a literature review of psychological, social scientific, public health research on homelessness specifically, you could do this on suicidality, a range of mental health issues for sure. But if you specifically look at homelessness in the scientific and social science literature, you will overwhelmingly see that religion is always framed as a risk factor for LGBTQ folks. A religious background, a religious identity, a religious family is almost always written about in terms of stigma or risk factor for homelessness. I think what is so powerful and provocative about this partnership is it is challenging that association.
exactly.
That religion is a stigma or risk factor. Nasheedah, you said earlier, religion has been co-opted. And it's really challenging that co-optation, like that
Yeah.
religion has more to offer.
And when you talk about the feeling of belonging, this is something that we belong here. Lost and Found was, to put it in spiritual terms, we were called, to this moment, and we belong here at Park Avenue, and I think that feeling is overwhelming when you walk into the space. And so there isn't that ambiguity that many of us, not just you, Keith, feel when we go into a church. That question of whether or not we belong. I feel like it's been made very clear by the co-pastors, by the deacons, by the guy who comes in to clean at night. That we belong here, and that's a feeling that many of our youth don't get to have
Mm-hmm.
in other spaces like this, in other churches.
Okay, I really want to pry into this belonging thing because I'm curious about how a Baptist church can cultivate this with queer and trans folk. And Darci, you have said to me explicitly before, and I know that you've communicated this in conversation with Lost and Found, about your mission at Park Ave is not conversion.
Yes.
Might you
Okay.
speak to that a minute?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you made that connection. And that's it. I mean, as we're saying belonging, I'm like, yeah. And then something little like went off in my head, and I was like, uh-oh, like, I hope no one is thinking church membership, right? And so when I initially, thank you, Nasheedah, when I was initially like thinking about this as our workshop, that's the paradigm, that's the main paradigm that has been my kind of, I don't know, something that I just have been laser focused on since seminary and during seminary, is this idea of evangelism, and that the church's motivation. So if we're talking about being upfront with our motivations, the church's motivations in the past has been in evangelism. And And then when that became like not cool to sort of be overtly saying you have the wrong faith, choose this faith, then it sort of went underground in this like kind of charismatic, just make Jesus look so cool, be like the cool person that also loves Jesus, and then somehow people will follow you. And for me, so I mean, just a bit about me again, you know, I live in an interfaith family, and have a lot of interfaith community, and I see the harm that that causes. I have been to those funerals with the altar call and have cried along with them even harder, because it's malpractice, and I don't know how to say it. I mean, that's saying it as bluntly as I possibly can. To believe that my faith will fix you in whatever way is a not logical, harmful, colonizer way of thinking. So to think that anything right, to think that I know for you what is best for you is a colonizer mentality. And so right, I think, I mean, just in general, I think if we as a Christian community decided to never ever proselytize again, I think we would be living into our mission, as God's folks and followers of Jesus. And so right, that's a huge statement. I think that comes from my own journey back to Christ, which was, okay, God, I'm going to do this because I know that I need Jesus in my life, but I will not tell anybody they're wrong. I will not think that this is the only way to be. I will not go back in the closet and pretend like I'm not me. So how am I going to work this out? And so a lot of my own faith journey has been reconciling, living into what I know to be a liberative faith, but that has been co-opted, just to, like Nasheedah said, co-opted and colonized in this empire kind of method. So our mission at Park Ave is never ever to convert anyone. We have deacons who don't profess to follow Jesus as the savior, right? And so I think we act in this faith, right? And it's more about that building of community than what we think in our minds. And yeah, I if there's any kind of loose ends in that, help me to tie them up. But I know I said some kind of strong things. I said it to my ordination council too.
Yeah. I want to just riff on that to highlight some of the good work I know that both of you do. And just say when conversion is not the goal, what does it look like? And I would say it looks like y'all opening up the church on Saturdays for clothing closets, food pantries, and free haircuts. It looks like art-based memorials on the street that are open to the public, that are collective spaces of mourning and ritualizing around racial justice, specifically Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. It's art-based groups on Friday nights where it's like, let's do poetry and create art together as a way for me to bring my truths and my meaning to this collective space where we can play, right? So I just want to highlight some of those things. And then Lost and Found shares too with who they are. CARE is providing material resources that we all need to flourish. It is food and housing and employment and meaningful connections and the reestablishment of family when we've lost it for various reasons. So I do want to offer those as alternatives to this ethic of conversion, what CARE can look like when it's not conversion. So does that resonate?
100%.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And community care is looking different nowadays, and it needs to continue to evolve, I think.
Mm-hmm. So y'all named some amazing things. If anyone has questions other than me, feel free to highlight them, turn your mic off, throw them in the chat. But I'm curious what advice you would give to other organizations or churches interested in a partnership model. What the implicit message that I hear you both saying is that we're not supposed to do this work alone. Like that's individualism, and it's also, Darcy, you were talking about this a minute ago, it's like white saviorism. And we're not called to those things. We're called to partnership and collaboration. So I heard that as like kind of like the theological or theoretical basis. But do y'all have advice for churches, nonprofits that want to start thinking about who they might be called to partner with?
Just be open and be ready. I've been at Lost and Found now for 5 years. And when I got here, I was hired by our founder, Rick Westbrook, and he would always say, and he's not like he would always say, whenever we need something, the universe produces it.
Mm.
And at the time that we encountered this partnership, we were actively looking for a new space for our youth center, and never in a million years would I have thought, oh yeah, we're going to go move into a Baptist church, but I was challenged when it came to me to just be open about what was being offered, and so I would just say be open and be ready, and it's not always going to look the way that you think it might look. Partnerships can come from a variety of different places.
Mm-hmm.
I hear in that you talking about a theology of abundance, and this idea that the universe, that God, that creatrix is present in our lives, and in the form of those around us, which again speaks to what Keith was talking about, is we're not meant to do this work alone. Community is the place. And I mean, what I've seen in Lost and Found's networking community are folks that are so rooted in the work and see the need. And it has made us focus, for sure. It's made us focus in on what we have to give, who are the priority in our building and in our work. Yeah, I think if I were to give some advice to churches, change your entire theology. No. No. But I do think I wish that we would have done just a little more training with all of our support staff, in terms of being a healing partnership. Because if one person, and it can be the person that's, also experiencing housing insecurity, but if they're connected to the church, that person's behavior, comments, all of that are a reflection of the whole church. So I think everyone needs to be like what you said, Nasheedah, that they need to be these culturally competent folks. So framing and training is always, what we want more of, but framing it in terms of care for everyone, I think is something more we could do, and I would like to live into.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to being a church, I mean, I remember walking them through the building the first time when Nasheedah had been there and Ernest had been there. And then we walked the staff through, and I remember their faces, and I was like, y'all, I promise there's like a lot of heart here. And I promise we're gonna work really hard here with, alongside you, because I think they were skeptical, and that's okay. Like, that is to be expected, not just of, a church and all that baggage, but like of an old building, and things go wrong, and You got to fix things a lot. But you guys have brought the life back to so many parts of our church. You know, we would do anything. We would do anything for y'all. So it will, I don't know, it's worth it. It's worth all of it, I think.
Mhm. Well, amen, amen. Darci, I know you have a resource. We have like 15, 20 minutes. I wonder if you might share this resource and how we might use it.
Yeah, so I do some work with the Forum for Theological Exploration, and we talk about discernment, um, and sometimes that's at an individual level, and sometimes that's at an institutional level. And so I thought that I could share this amazing resource, and if we wanted to use like a case study, if anybody has like, gosh, I wish my church could go through this, maybe we could brainstorm with you some of the ways that who are your allies in this journey. And so let me share screen and I'll talk through this document. And this is rooted in Quaker practices that were sort of translated through the work of the Forum for Theological Exploration. So they often talk about next faithful steps. And I think that that's sort of what Nasheedah was talking about in this being open to what could be next, to the need that could be fulfilled. And so discerning the next most faithful steps. This document, again, is going to be sort of rooted to the personal, but I think it can be and is used at an institutional level as well. So, you know, if we're talking about the topic of LGBTQIA homelessness, then that would be the topic here. But maybe there's something else that your context is really, really close to and really invested in. I know Letitia's on the call. First Presbyterian is really invested in the homeless, the marginally housed folks services that you have there. So, you know, it's like finding that thing that your congregation is really motivated by. And then, so the possibilities here, I think this is particular for them in terms of like grants, but again, this is just getting you further along in that process of discerning what really the steps could be. So if they're saying, what are two possible ideas that could help you further explore your question? So this is a space for saying, like, if you're looking at LGBTQIA homelessness and you want to help, what are some ideas that will bring you closer to exploring that question? So if you're in a congregation, maybe it's a sermon series. And then this is sort of like an inventory of what they call like a assets mapping. So the things that you could offer, the places and relationships that you could leverage or offer in this journey. So this is kind of like discerning how you influence your context, right? And so then you kind of look at who are your allies, who's on your team, is like, who are the people, who are the deacons, who are the clergy folk in your context that can and will go to bat with you in this. And then you move toward your most faithful steps. So the most faithful next step can be a small step. It's not move them in, although that's kind of the speed that we work at. But it could be starting to do a study or watch a documentary. So does anybody want to offer to be like the center of the brainstorming storm, brainstorming storm? But what I think what could happen would be the creative focus of the group could be on you and asking questions that are important, which is similar to Quaker processes where you discern. Oh, I think you're still muted, Aaron.
I'm unmuted now.
Yes. Hey.
I'm just trying to find out where to get that.
Oh, take a screenshot of it. I
Yeah.
can send a link to, I think I have a link.
Yeah, if you're on a map or a Mac, you can Command Shift 4,
Command Shift 4.
and it'll let you draw a box to screenshot it.
Oh,
Here,
yeah,
I can.
look at that.
I can make sure that Darci has your email address, Erin.
Yeah, I would love to have to connect with you, Erin. I think I put it in there. Everybody or someone click on that link that I put in the chat and see if it opens for you.
Uh-huh.
It does? Yay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yay. Thank
So
you.
I was just at this discernment retreat where we used that and gave that to young folks. But I think that continuing to discern is that posture that Nasheedah was talking about in terms of being open to what's the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question related to that actually for you guys. If I can save it if you want me to wait.
I'd be open to it. What do y'all think?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're like a year, a little more or so into this partnership, right? And I'm curious about, given your discernment, the discernment thing that you just posted, what you see as the next faithful step. And I ask that with humility, knowing that it takes a lot to keep what you're doing going and just to respond, especially in the midst of pandemic, to the needs. But I'm curious about what you see on the horizon and what feels exciting to you now.
I think when we first, I think, Nasheedah, can I characterize how I think we are when we're in meetings together? I think that we have this very expansive idea, or at least this sort of dreaming mentality that that does project us forward in hopefully a growing partnership. At least for me, I see it in a couple of different ways, and I don't know how comfortable I feel like sharing them out loud, but I do think in the pandemic, we have had to shift some of our ministry model. One of our large ministry branches was based on churches using the space and having and they called it like urban immersion, which I think is an outdated term even for what we do, since we asked them to do cultural competency classes, and it's called Lydia's House. It's quite lovely. And we offer modules of learning and things in that. And it has been and is a really important ministry of our church. And in this foreseeable year, we will not have that. And so that's also a large amount of space that is dedicated to that. So we don't move forward fast by any means. And I think that we're discerning the next faithful step, right, toward, well, there are folks that need spaces right now. And this is a ministry that has a history with us. So, I don't say that that's exactly where we're going, but I know Nasheedah and I have talked about that. Their board has come to us like, we thought this was happening. So we're like seeing that. I hope to coax the whole offices, the whole of their offices to come over to this space eventually.
Nasheedah, what time you said we're gonna be leaving?
But there are definitely some barriers to that as well, in that we don't have a lot of accessibility in our church. There is space for an elevator, but the second floors, the third floor of the church is not accessible. So we need to catch up in that way. Our parking is street parking, so that's limited as well. So there are barriers. There are allies in that. There are folks that want to keep things the same, for sure.
And I can speak a little bit about how I'm plugging into all this as far as the next faithful steps go. Um, One of my passions for a while has been trauma-informed care, specifically trauma-informed but resiliency-focused. Because what I know from working as a trauma chaplain and doing a lot of community trauma work is sometimes even our care can just focus on someone's trauma and honestly re-traumatize or kind of talk about people in terms of their trauma. And so I'm really interested in bringing resiliency focused care, not trauma focused, resiliency focused, but still trauma informed. And I think Park Ave and Lost and Found already have the foundational commitments and missions for this. So I know in the coming weeks, months, I'll be doing art-based focus groups and interviews with different clients and congregants about resilience. How do you think about resilience? How do you think about your own internal and communal resources? What do you need? But also, what do you already have? What are the capacities and resources? Maybe it's ancestral. I remember doing the warming shelter, being a volunteer at the warming shelter last year and talking with the youth well into the night. And they kept talking about their ancestors. And that just like kept coming up in conversation. It was such a resource, a source of strength and a source of comfort, a source of resilience for this person. So I'm really interested. I think my next faithful steps as it relates to these communities is how do we think about creating an entire community that is trauma informed, that knows how to respond to someone in the throes of trauma, but that can be focused on our inherent, both individual, because I believe it's from God, but also our collective resiliency. So I think that's one way to think about our next faithful steps too, as it relates to my participation in this.
You better preach, Keith. And he does sometimes preach.
I do love to preach. So.
Yeah, I would love to do more arts-based programming.
Mm-hmm. And that's a
Well, we have, there are at any given time about 1,000 or more LGBT youth who are experiencing homelessness in the city of Atlanta. And overall, it's upwards of 3,000. And so we have to find them homes. We have to get them off the streets. And so with my next faithful step is finding more and more opportunities for housing, and increasing the amount of space. We're looking for another house now, and to expand our reach. You know, 1,000 is a lot, and they don't come alone. I like to say we serve LGBT youth and their friends, because we're seeing, you know, as the world opens up for us, what we see is that their communities are not exclusively LGBT, and our folks, our youth come to us in the groups that they live within on the streets. And so a lot of those groups include heterosexual youth as well. And so we have a big job ahead of us. It is an absolutely attainable job. I believe that we have the resources that we need to fix this problem right now in the city of Atlanta, and we just gotta pull them together. But just adding more and more housing, focusing on the needs of LGBT youth who are experiencing homelessness, and grow in a way that is helpful.
Mm-hmm. The resiliency focused mindset right there. Yeah. Great. So I know we're coming up on our time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or haven't addressed? Lingering questions or concerns or comments?
Well, this is just an amazing an amazing experience for me to hear, you know, what you guys are doing. It makes me wish I was like 30 years younger so I could figure out uh, you know, how to be involved with something like this. The the this sounds awfully mundane, but I wondered at what level and how did your board or your boards get involved in this process? Is that something that you had to drag them along, kicking and screaming? Did you have to spend a lot of time sort of educating and motivating them? How did you do that? I am on a nonprofit board and I have no idea what we're doing, none whatsoever. So, you know, I'm really kind of, I wish that we had people like you sort of to sort of guide us. But how did that happen?
For us, for us, it was easy. I mean, I at the time, Ernest was still here. Ernest was my co-director. He was over the programs, and I've been, for the most part, over operations since I've been at Lost and Found. And we went to the board and we told them about the church. And as soon as we said church, we got some raised eyebrows. And then when we started talking, they kind of lowered. And and then they just kind of let us lead and let us move into the partnership. And I think the once our board learned, the more they learned about in our the chair at the time, we've since rotated chairs, but the chair at the time had had a prior experience. He lives in the neighborhood and had a prior experience with the church, and so that made it somewhat easier.
Well, and I think on our end, oh, there's my little person. Um, in the end, for us, it was, you know, we wanted to make it irresistible to them, you know, and because we had people that were in community, you know, and we've all been very frank and open with each other. You know, we knew that, you know, what we could offer at the price we could offer would make it hard for their board to justify saying no, right? And so, you know, and again, leading with the, hey, this is what we never will ever do to your youth, your workers, your you know, your folks that are coming in and out, and the community of Park Ave. This is one of the things that really touched my heart when I first got here. um, and this gentleman has since passed on, but there's a different guy, but there's this awning in the back of the church, and gentlemen, the couple of folks in the neighborhood have lived there for many years, right? And instead of asking them and making them move or calling the police, we got them like a trunk to put their stuff in, right? Because we recognize that, first, I mean, it's not just like the mission to love on people, da, 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 but like we recognize, and you know, we have tried to help them to become housed, but we recognize that they were here before me. You know, they were in this space before me. And so one of the things that just really made my heart sing was just the fact that we weren't trying to change these guys, you know. And I'm sure now the on-site folks, you know, have to step over them sometimes and get to know them, and the trunk is still there. In fact, I think somebody just replaced it with a new one. And so I don't know, I just think that mentality, you know, goes a long way, to say, we accept people, we accept you, you know. I'm a person in recovery, and I think sometimes recovery can be kind of fundamentalist in like, you either get help or you're, you know, you're falling behind. And it's like, no, you know, everyone is where they are. And so this sort of harm reduction framework is so important to have when you're thinking about humans, and life is so hard and messy, not to mention if you have these like intersecting marginalities, and so yeah, anyway. leading
It's
with
funny. I had a conversation with one of our board members when the first time we had our board meeting there. Someone had a concern about the guys sleeping outside, and I kind of was like, we're an organization that serves homeless people. Like, and they live here, and sometimes when we we partner with an organization called Second Helpings that picks up the most delicious food from restaurants all over Atlanta. And so sometimes when we have extra food, we're able to feed the guys if they're around and stuff. But yeah, that's the work. We have to take care of our folks, and we can't say, oh, we're here just to take care of these folks, And we have to take care of all of our folks. Or I do. That's why I'm here, and I believe that's why y'all are here too.
Yeah, and I think that that's so the image that some queer churches have, right? Like, and I don't even think it's all queer churches, but like we say, oh, well, God loves gay folks, and we kind of open the box just that far to let
Right.
in gay folks, but then it's like, oh, but the monopoly on God is still there, and we still have some kind of figmented control over who's in and who's out. It's just that they're in now because that's cool. But I think about that like with care too, if we care, then we really have to extend that care. Well, there are other orgs also that are doing this work. There's one in New York, actually, that Letitia served. Did you serve at when you were in seminary? Okay, you just knew about it?
A good friend, yeah.
Okay, what is it called again? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
I'll put a link in the chat. It's a Lutheran church on the Upper West Side that houses it's a shelter for LGBT young adults, Holy Trinity Lutheran.
Oh.
Yeah. And I'll say like the nonprofit.
Trinity Lutheran, I'm sorry. It's Trinity Place Shelter.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the church partnership model can look like, it can look like 100 things. But the church, when I lived in North Carolina, I was on staff at another progressive Baptist church that was so committed to recovery that AA and NA met in our church building like 8 times a week. Like as a church, we were always trying to like coordinate and dodge and like, nope, NA has this space at this time, AA has it at this, and like that just became a part of the ethos of the church. And so much of the congregation began speaking that language, sharing that commitment, and that just became a part of who we are. I'm excited to see how Park Ave will keep growing and changing and being like, you know what? Fighting to end homelessness, specifically for LGBTQ folks, like this is going to be who we are. And I'm excited to see how this will shape us in surprising ways. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Nasheedah. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and thanks for everything you do.
Thank you for everything you do.
And I can't wait for Keith's project to do.
Me too. I think Keith, you've been working mostly with Danielle, but it is a pleasure to get to know you a little better during this process.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Well,
thank you guys for being part of the workshop lineup. This has been fantastic.
I'm so glad we were able to. I'm going to go ahead and put my email in here. If anybody wants to reach out to talk about, to talk about this work, or there's Keith's too. Good.
Mm-hmm.
I hope more churches do it.